Hi, my name is Jack, and I'm a solutions engineer here at Box. In this episode of the Secure Remote Work How-To video series, I'll be sharing with you how you can manage folder sprawl within Box. From this video, Box admins and end users will learn best practices for folder structure design and external collaboration. With today's business model shifting to work from home, organizing and sharing content in Box efficiently can simplify your work while improving security. So let's get started. Before diving into a specific example, here's the process for effectively configuring your Box environment. First, you'll want to finalize what you'll be using Box for, as these use cases will dictate how you organize and share information. Second, you'll map out who needs to own what in the environment. More on this in a moment. Third, determine the access required by other users in the environment. Fourth, you'll actually build the folders out and distribute content accordingly. I want to quickly highlight a few of the many ways in which you can organize content in Box. Without diving into the nitty-gritty, here are three of the most common approaches. A date-based approach makes the most sense when you have chronologically sorted content that becomes a record over time, as with a case file or account history. Another approach is the business object-based strategy, in which you might break out different functional areas for a given group or project. Finally, a subfolder-based strategy makes sense when you have a tremendous amount of similar content that needs to be broken up in order to navigate it more easily. For today's demonstration, we'll be using the example of an event management agency planning for an upcoming air show. They need to organize critical planning documents, vendor contracts, and media assets. They're also working with a number of external parties who they'll want to collaborate with as part of the planning process. Before we begin sharing access to folders, it's important to understand how Box handles access permissions. Box provisions access using a waterfall design, meaning an individual will have access to the folder they are invited into and also any subfolders beneath it. That means if a user is invited to the marketing department folder, they'll also be able to see and access these other three folders. When you share access to a folder, a collaborator can be invited with any of the following 7 levels of access. These permission levels will apply to both types of users in Box, the internal managed user and the external collaborator. Most often when you're working on a project with an internal team, you'll share editor access, so you and the team can all work on the same files. In other situations, you might want to invite a stakeholder or external collaborator to look at the content without actually changing any of it. In this case, you'd want to use the viewer or previewer access permission, depending on whether or not you want them to be able to download the files. Make sure that as you add a new collaborator, you select the access permission that best fits their role, and in the lowest level folder to the content they need to access. Now that we've reviewed the different types of access you can grant, let's review some best practices for how you organize both folder structures and user access. First, you'll want to store more restricted content in a higher folder level. That way, you can build increasingly permissive folder structure below that level. This is important because of the way waterfall permissions grant the same level of access to a given collaborator for all folders and subfolders they're invited into. If you look at the sharing sidebar as we click down into the subfolders for the media team, you can see more and more collaborators have access to those subfolders. Second, think carefully about the naming conventions you use to organize your content. Collaborators will only be able to see the name of the highest level folder they're invited into. So if you have a project folder, make sure the subfolders include the name of the project as well as the purpose of the folder. For example, the name Aero Event Management plus Paladin Catering reminds the external collaborator who they're working with and reminds our vendor team which vendor will be doing work there. Third, try to keep the folder structure as flat as possible. This means you'll want to minimize the number of subfolders at each level and group content at the highest level that makes sense. This simplifies navigation because you'll avoid having to access a file by clicking down into many subfolders. By keeping the folder structure flat, more of the work you and your team will perform will happen in one folder, which streamlines security and increases visibility. As we can see in the marketing department folder, we've put schedules, brochures, and budgets next to each other rather than creating folders for each one, which reduces the clicks required to review high access frequency content. Fourth, designate subfolders to organize all the externally accessible content, rather than sharing files on an individual basis. By inviting external parties into folders enclosed by one collaboration folder, you'll have fewer places to monitor activity or enforce security policies. This will allow you and your team to have one go-to area for all their externally facing work, while maintaining a more private folder for the internal team. Within this collaborative workspace, we can monitor the content shared with any of the external parties we work with. Now, when Paladin Catering is working with your team, they have a space to organize their content and do meaningful work. So let's review. The 4 key items to take away from this video are: 1, more restricted content should live at a higher folder level. 2, name folders clearly so collaborators understand their purpose. 3, keep your folder structure as flat as possible. 4, create separate folders for external collaboration. By now, you are ready to design a folder structure that helps you get your work done in a powerful, flexible way. Please be sure to check out the other videos in our Secure Remote Work How-To video series and visit box.com/remote to learn more about how Box can help you and your team work from anywhere.